Peace to those who are far off and to those who are near. My name is Buff Grace, and I serve congregations through an organization called Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. We work with people of all faiths to respond to the climate crisis. St. Mark's is one of our thriving partners. Your climate task force has done excellent work over the last years, from energy audits to policy advocacy, and I salute Joe Ward and all the task force members dedicated to this cause. It's also encouraging to see cathedral leadership in support of this effort, including Dean Paul and Deacon Rena. The task force is welcoming new members, so if you're interested, speak with Reverend Rena Turnham or with Joe Ward. And now to reflect on this gospel reading. Jesus and his friends go on vacation today. A number of years ago, my spouse and I went on vacation to Ecuador. We were ready for a rest. I had worked 7 weeks in a row, and my wife had worked 12 weeks with only 3 days off. We were pretty spent. After a few days in Quito, we left for a quiet resort in the jungle. We crossed to the other side of the Andes, then descended 40 miles of river gorge down to a bustling farming community, and on from there, following narrower roads through smaller and dustier towns. Then we turned down what we thought was someone's driveway, but it was actually 60 miles of washboarded road, dead-ending at a little matchbook cottage clinging to the edge of a dark river. And from here, we unloaded our bags and our bodies into a boat carved from a long tree trunk and motored downstream through a necklace of wavy rapids, serpentining bend after hypnotizing bend, until finally, 24 hours after we had departed, the Jewel Hotel, like a mirage, glowed out of the wet green. We had gone to the end of the earth. The place was exquisite, carved out of the jungle, built from local materials. We swam in azure pools, we lounged on woven recliners, drinking fruit-fresh licuados, and we soaked up warm massages. We were in paradise. There was a wall that backed the resort, keeping the jungle at bay, and one day, taking a different path back to our room, we stumbled upon a large door in this wall. The door was ajar, and so we stuck our heads through. And on the other side was a muddy little street chopped into the trees and vines. And this was flanked by a ramshackle set of homes salvaged from tin and wood wedged into the jungle. And standing in that mud track in front of these hovels were 20 or so barefoot, mud-stained children, half naked, and a few weathered elderly people missing teeth. They all looked hungry. Their squalor shocked us. But we had startled them also, and we gaped at one another across this invisible chasm, this kind of disenchanted and broken taboo, until I gently pulled the door shut, and my spouse and I drifted back to our room in a trance, as if our eyes had not been open, as if our vacation had not just ended. What do Jesus and his friends find in the remote retreat they seek? This chapter 6 of Mark begins with Jesus sending his disciples out in pairs on a business trip to proclaim God's kingdom and heal in his name. They come back ecstatic at all they've accomplished and also ready for some rest. And Jesus says, let's go on retreat. On their way, they have to stop and teach and feed 5,000 souls. And then they get caught in a storm on their way to the retreat. These stories are skipped over in today's reading. And finally, they arrive, the Galilean shore glowing like a hotel resort, only to find there more needy that need tending, more of their vocation never ending, The desert fills with the empty, deserted, who entreat Jesus' retreat, and the weary disciples must respond to the weary. Perhaps you were planning a vacation this summer, or you've taken one. What happens when your resort collides with someone else's last resort? That is Mark's question. And yet the question is already too pale for our day. Were there a 21st century Mark writing today, I think he would give us a more harrowing question. What happens when your resort becomes your own last resort? What happens when your vacation becomes your evacuation? Because you see, that is the situation we have created with the climate crisis. I called one of my friends a couple of weeks ago and found her out on a trip in Oregon to see her grandchildren. "Oh, Oregon," I said. "That sounds like fun." "It's 113 degrees in Portland," she said. "We're dying. My son's home doesn't have AC. We are literally taking turns in the kiddie pool to survive." Another couple of friends a few years ago went to Florida, just ahead of Labor Day, excited for the Disney amusements. They spent their vacation evacuating with 6.5 million people up a parade of interstate, fleeing one of the strongest hurricanes to hit the U.S., Irma. "This was not the ride we had in mind," they posted on Facebook. More and more, we are rolling the dice when we plan a restful destination. Will we land in flood like those of Germany and Belgium this week, washing away whole neighborhoods, a death toll now greater than 160? Will we land in wildfires like those blanketing so much of our western U.S.? This question of vacation and rest amidst catastrophe, I think, dramatizes perhaps better than anything the full predicament that we are in. My spouse and I closed that door at the resort because what we saw overwhelmed us. We didn't know what, if anything, we could do for the people we saw. And while we did need rest, we were sure they probably needed a lot more rest than we did. Jesus questions and convicts us about closing that door. Jesus over and over becomes that door, unifying people across need and difference. But what if the climate crisis brings the whole wall crumbling down? What if we all realize we are all the have-nots? We are all in peril. We know global warming is happening. A majority of people in every county in Minnesota agree with this, and a majority in most counties know it is caused by humans. Burning fossil fuels for 100 plus years, humans have exponentially increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This has warmed the planet, leading to a variety of dire consequences. Many are responding to those consequences too, taking steps to reduce energy use, planting trees, recycling, bicycling, buying an electric vehicle, starting a compost bin, and on and on and on. Many things that you all have done here at St. Mark's. Each of these acts is just as much an act of mercy as Jesus and his disciples healing the sick. But when we look at Jesus, we see he did not stop there. Those acts of mercy were mile markers on a journey to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, where he went to confront the corrupted powers and to dismantle the system from the inside out. If we are going to have any hope of righting this climate crisis, we too will have to address the system and the source. Fossil fuel. Fossil fuel, coal, oil, gas, petroleum, plastics, all of it, so much of it throughout our lives. It's an industry that receives $20 billion a year in government welfare, an industry that has senators and congresspeople in their back pocket. an industry that knew the science of climate crisis decades ago and yet spent millions to sow disinformation to protect their profits. But we can begin dismantling the system today. You can begin in two ways. One, you can stop investing in fossil fuels. It's not easy, it takes some work. The big asset managers and major banks invest heavily in fossil fuels. Unless you've already taken action, you almost certainly are supporting fossil fuels right now with your investments. But you can change that. And you can make solid returns on things that don't involve fossil fuels. You can start with a website called stopthemoneypipeline.org. You can talk to your financial planner. St. Mark's Endowment Committee is in the midst right now of researching and moving the cathedral's investments out of fossil fuels. We can do it. Two, you can help stop the largest climate problem in Minnesota, Line 3. You can stop Line 3. Line 3 is a pipeline being constructed by a Canadian company, Enbridge, to move tar sands across Minnesota to export in Superior, Wisconsin, only for export. It will double the greenhouse gases of our entire state's economy. And it's already threatening 13 watersheds across northern Minnesota, including the headwaters of the Mississippi and some of the most pristine waters on the planet. Today, right now, as we are worshiping, a group of St. Markans, led by Steve Gov, are visiting one of the indigenous resistance camps along Line 3. You can visit them too. And these indigenous water protectors are no feeble band in the jungle. They are lawyers, politicians, mothers, grandmothers, organizers, business people. They've been fighting this pipeline for 7 years through scores of public hearings, court cases, prayer and ceremony, public witness, nonviolent direct action, and civil disobedience. They've inspired a coalition of 50-some groups and orgs, and one of the largest, who have followed their leadership as allies and partners. And at one of the largest public hearings about the pipeline, this coalition fielded 68,000 comments against Line 3, compared to 3,000 for it. Minnesota's own Department of Commerce stated the pipeline is economically unnecessary, and it sued the Public Utilities Commission, saying their decision was based on an inadequate report. The pipeline violates and will further violate the 1855 treaty rights of these tribes, treaties that you and I are party to. And already 4 employees of contractors of Enbridge have been arrested in sex trafficking stings in northern Minnesota, which is a common problem, especially for indigenous women where pipelines are built. At every single turn, Line 3 has proven to be a bad idea. And yet our government continues to grant it permits. Last week, they granted Enbridge 5 billion gallons of water for construction needs, as if northern Minnesota were not in a terrible drought. You can get involved and stand with indigenous peoples and for your children and your grandchildren's futures. We all need times of rejuvenation. Jesus knew this, and he sought it for his friends that followed him. He embraced the law and tradition of Sabbath that he had received. And he also chose, when faced with need, to follow his vocation, to see the needs of his fellow human beings and respond, even when he was on vacation. And then he followed that pain and suffering all the way upstream to get to its source and do what he could to challenge and change it.